All right. Yes. So heights and weights, we have tons of them, and most of these guys have added what we believe to be good weight. I noticed the two great linebackers, Jackson and Higgins, just needed to drop a couple pounds. But the other thing that came to mind before we show these and get your analysis on which ones stood out to you was between two of the tight ends. One of them had to bulk up. Ortworth, our guy Ortworth, had to gain like 20 pounds. And then
Well,
can't think of the other guy's name. He had to drop like 30, 35. They had to bring him down.
yeah, well, Ortworth's the second-year guy. This is his second year, and he's playing a freshman last year. It was very surprising to me. I agree. I mean, we can run through all these. I don't know how you want to do this, Mark, but yeah, Ostringa was one that was a little surprising that he dropped some weight. Lachey dropped a little weight. I think that would probably do Ostringa a little. I think that'll do him a load of good. Actually, I don't know what he was out of high school, but apparently he went from 255 to 251. So maybe that helps his speed. I mean, it's only 4 pounds, but hopefully that helps him be a bit more of a downfield threat. Mark, it's funny we talk about this because it was maybe a couple months ago. I remember you bringing up to me when we were talking about tight ends. You brought up to me, obviously Iowa's tight ends have been great. They're great every year, but you were surprised at how low Ostringa's yards per catch average was.
Yes.
So
this is not to cut you off. This is not allowing me to scroll the page.
Well, we just start at the top, Mark. You want to start back at the top?
But
this is courtesy of our.
That's what I'm saying. I can't scroll.
Well, you're going to have to just go click on each one individually. No, not each player. You're going to have to just click on each screenshot. These are just screenshots here.
Okay.
So you'll just have to scroll up in the.
Well, I will do that offline, so I'm not divulging our conversations or any other ones.
All right, so the big ones, you got Cale Winter adding 32 pounds. So he goes from 253 to 285. This was one I was looking for. Cade Piper goes from 255 to 275. Why is that significant? Because when Cade Piper initially committed to Iowa, less than 2 years ago, I think it was, we were like, man, is this guy going to end up being big enough to play offensive line? He was listed at 255 last year. And how about this, Mark? If you look up Cade Piper, who was a very late ad for Iowa in the, that would have been the 2023 recruiting class. If you look up his recruiting page, according to 247, he was 240. Actually, let me make a correction there. Yes, 240 out of Norfolk, Nebraska. On3 had him at 240. So now he is up to 275. It's 35 pounds, and he is not even entering his second fall camp. And he entered the depth chart. He appeared on the depth chart and actually played in a little game action late in the year, which, again, you think about a freshman doing that is really impressive. And there were a lot of experienced guys last year that have been around the program several years up front. Same thing this year. But here's a guy who obviously has performed well early in the program. In spite of being undersized, he's now listed at 275. So that's huge. Tegan Davis gaining 27 pounds is interesting. He's also a second-year guy. I mean, you're going to have the biggest weight gains for some of those guys entering their second year. But, Tegan going up to 187, I wonder how big he needs to be because he's listed as a corner. He was a late flip out of from Eastern Illinois, and then Kenneth Merriweather, who's got the intangibles. Again, though, that was the thing when he got to Iowa. He's undersized. He was at 227. He's up to 255. So as an edge rusher at 255, maybe still a little on the light side, maybe. But, I mean, I think with his skill set, he was a wide receiver in high school. He might be able to make an impact right away. You mentioned Ortworth. Nolan DeLong, who's a linebacker, added 20 pounds up to 230. Judah Mallett, who's a walk-on receiver, added 19 pounds. He's at 197. And then another tight end added 18 pounds. That's Grant Leaper, who's entering his second year. I really like him. He's a guy who didn't play last year, but he needed to gain some weight. Same with Cannon Leonard. He's up to 306 now, the big 6'8", offensive tackle out of Illinois. And Jarrett Bowie, who also appeared on the depth chart last year as a freshman. 185, he goes to 200. Again, some of these I'm like, well, okay, I wouldn't have been able to tell you if Jarrett Bowie needed to lose weight or gain weight. I mean, he's 185, so obviously probably didn't need to lose weight. But, he is a 6'3 receiver, 6'3, 6'4. He's a bigger receiver, so it makes sense. You obviously don't want to pack too many. Don Patterson's talked about this. I remember him, I believe he was, I'd have to ask Don about this, but if you go back to one of his great tight ends, and it might have been Marv Cook. Remember one year, Don asked Marv, how do you feel? I think it was I don't know if it was in the spring or if it was in the fall. He said, how do you feel, Marv? And Marv said to Don, he said, well, quite frankly, Coach, I feel a little bit sluggish. And Don said, I'm glad you're saying that because I agree. And he had to drop a few pounds. So he had gained weight and had to come back down. And so some of this is not a catch-22, but it's a kind of a trial and error to see what the ideal weight is for each of these players. There's not a one-size-fits-all. I thought it was interesting. You go down to the very bottom of this list. You had a couple offensive linemen lose some weight. So Michael Myslinski, who's dealt with injuries, he lost 5 pounds. Leighton Jones lost 4 pounds. Now, those are interior guys, but Jennings Dunker goes from 320 to 316. That's not huge, but I think some people that don't, I don't pretend to understand line play to some great extent, but I am confident in saying it's not all about weight, and some people make it all about weight. So that kind of caught my attention. As far as people who have lost weight, Jazz Patterson, that was probably the biggest one that stood out to me. He goes from 204 to 195. So there's a young player who we didn't know if he'd stick around. He's a Florida kid who's, I don't want to say buried on the depth chart, but he's in a loaded room. He's down to 195. Now, that might be the most interesting. That's one I'd like to ask him about. I'd like to ask Liddell about. Hopefully I'll get a chance to do that at Media Days. What was the thinking behind that? Honestly,
the other running back, Corey, LaShawn Williams, picked up 6.
Yeah. I'm curious. I'm not aware of any serious injury that would have maybe been instrumental in the weight change. I'm just looking at the same thing you're looking at here. So, yeah, I don't know. Luke Lachey lost 6 pounds as well. Maybe probably insignificant. Cade McNamara gained 5 pounds. So that's something. Yeah, I think the Jazz Patterson thing is the biggest one.
McNamara probably because he couldn't walk for half the offseason.
Well, that could that very well could be. I think all the other ones are pretty insignificant in large part. To see why Black gain anything is impressive. He's already 315. He's up to 317 now.
Corey, guess what player came to mind when you said, when you started on this list, you made a reference to, I wonder if we've done this in previous off seasons, or I don't remember us doing this in previous off seasons. You know what player came to mind?
Who?
Deacon Hill.
Well, we haven't. Yeah, I think we've talked about one person's weight in previous off seasons. Probably not as extensive as this was. How about Tyler Ellsbury? He's an interior guy, but 316. Talk about a big boy right there. I'll be interested to see what he can do. There were moments the last couple seasons where he looked like one of the better interior guys, and never really seemed to establish himself as a starter. So that is interesting. Drew Stevens, he has gained some weight. He's up to 205. I don't know what that means other than I would think it would help his leg strength, although I don't think he needs much help with distance. Let's see, looking through some of these other numbers. Aaron Graves has hit the 300 mark, up from 293. So, maybe it's the time for him. Not that it's all about weight, but I would have to think that that's about where he would think his ideal weight should be. Dayton Howard, big 6'5" receivers, up to 204. He gained 9 pounds in the offseason. So that's substantial. You got Jack Dotzler, who's finally looks like a college football player at 305. He's a big 6'7" tackle from Wisconsin. Kamari Moulton gained 12 pounds. So again, Jazz Patterson loses about that much. Kamari Moulton gains about that much. So I'm curious from your perspective, Mark. Can we talk about this Jazz Patterson thing? Because I know you you don't watch as much Hawkeye football as I do, but I know it's not a one size fits all. I get that. But I find it interesting, assuming that was all intentional. Him losing 9 pounds was by design. All we heard about with guys like Tyler Goodson and frankly, Akram Wadley was that they didn't gain enough weight. And if you go back to Jazz Patterson's recruiting profile and you look at him on 247 Sports, he came in at approximately 190, quickly got up to 204, and now loses 9 pounds back to 195. I don't know that 195 is light. It's certainly light for the league, right? I mean, to be a between the tackles back in the league, he's a downhill runner. I don't know. That one's maybe the most curious to me of all the numbers on this list.
So between the three running backs that get playing time, considering their frame and their height, how would you think that they would be proportioned in regards to the weight disparity?
Here's what I'll say, and this goes back to watching Sean Green growing up. And this is going to make a lot of people be like, what? What are you talking about? But if you go back and watch some of Jazz Patterson's, and I believe he was maybe hurt his senior year. I think he was dinged up his senior year. They had some weird stuff going on down there at Deerfield Beach in Florida. So he had kind of a weird senior year. But his junior tape, he looked like a young Sean Green at times. Now, highlight film, I was not there in person, but at times he looked like a young Sean Green. Sean Green, you go to his Iowa profile, was 235 by the time he was a junior and won the Doak Walker Award. Now, obviously, Jazz Patterson's never going to be 235. However, if you look at Sean Green, when I remember when I was watching Jazz Patterson film, I'm like, I wonder, because he reminds me of how he runs and his ability to square up his shoulders and get low and make guys miss and kind of do it all type of back. I wondered what Sean Green's high school weight was. And according to 247 Sports, Sean Green in high school was listed at about 200 pounds. So that's a substantial weight gain. You get to college. Now, I mean, again, we're talking about Sean Green's junior year and winning the Doak Walker Award, but I kind of expected with frame, they were about the same height at 5'10", 5'11", and style. I get everybody's different, but I kind of thought Jazz Patterson, if anything, he'd gain a little bit more weight. So to see him lose weight, that is my. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, because certainly other people know better than I do, but that would be the one thing that I'd kind of wonder about.
Who wins a race between those three?
Between what three?
The Williams, Johnson, and Patterson.
Well, Johnson does. I mean, Caleb does in a sprint. If it's a sprint, he's got the longest stride. He's the tallest back. He's got the longest stride. He's got the best breakaway speed. That's the thing. Like, we've talked the last 2 years, especially since Liddell got here, last several years, we've talked about how he has targeted, I think, more of your do-it-all type backs, and he's yet to strike lightning on them. The room is really strong. Obviously, it's hard to get a Sean Green, but Iowa fans have long envied what Wisconsin has done under Brett Bielema, under Gary Anderson, under, Luke Fickell's yet to prove it, but I'm guessing, given the history, that he'll be able to get it done. Who's the guy I'm missing? Who just left Wisconsin a year ago?
Braylon.
No. Yeah, Braylon Allen, but I'm talking about the coach. Who's the head coach? Who am I?
Paul Chryst.
Paul Chryst, thank you. So I think Iowa fans have long envied what Wisconsin's been able to do. And some of these guys, a lot of the guys that Iowa has recruited, Wisconsin ends up nabbing, and then they turn into just these world stars at Wisconsin, and then they end up in the league. So you have Braylon Allen's an example. You have Jonathan Taylor as an example. You have James White as an example. You have Agumba Wale. I mean, you just go Melvin Gordon. You can go down. This list is ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And Iowa was in a lot of those kids. Here's another example. Eno Benjamin didn't go to Wisconsin, but Iowa has him, ends up putting up record numbers at Arizona State.
Yep.
My point is I think they are targeting, I think since Liddell has gotten there, they're in on what I believe to be more of your complete style of backs. And I thought Patterson and Caleb Johnson both fit that bill. The one thing Caleb has not proven the ability to do consistently is put his foot in the ground and change direction. So, will that happen? That's why I say they've been close. They've got guys who have better speed, who a guy like Jazz Patterson, I think, is better through contact. But can you combine it all together and get any of those guys that we just named from Wisconsin? Get one of those guys to be your feature back. I mean, Iowa State's doing it on the regular now. I think that's the thing maddening for me. You got guys like David Montgomery and Breece Hall, and now you have Abu Sama, who I think is going to be a Doak Walker Award candidate this year. So I don't know. It's just interesting, and I'm not trying to read too far into the Jazz Patterson weight change, but I thought maybe he'd have the chance if he got a little bit bigger to be that type of a guy like a Sean Green, but it doesn't appear that's where he's headed if the weight change is any indicator.
But Iowa State is not going anywhere in particular to get those backs. The last 3, 4, 5 guys that they've gotten who have been exceptional, they're from all over the place, correct?
Say that again.
In terms of where Iowa State has recruited and signed these backs from, it's not like they're all in-state guys or anything like that.
No, and a lot of them, it's not like Iowa's gotten all their running backs from one area of the country. They've been, I believe Eno Benjamin was a Texas kid. Caleb is an Ohio kid. You got Jazz and Kamari, who are both from Florida. I'm trying to think of where Leishon is from. And maybe Leishon will have a breakout year. Can one of those guys really emerge? I think that the ceiling is higher for a guy like Jazz. I think the ceiling is higher for a guy like Caleb. But both of those guys have things to prove. Kamari Moulton's weight gain is intriguing because he was really small when he got here, but he played small last year, and he came in against Penn State and played some big snaps. So the fact that he's going to be bigger, hey, maybe he emerges. I like Brevin Dahl a lot. And sometimes they got to use everybody in that room just to have a running back on the field. Xavier Williams, another kid from Chicago, coming in this year who's already big. He's what is Xavier Williams? I just talked to him here a few weeks ago. What is his and again, everybody's different, Mark. He's not 6 foot, but Xavier Williams is listed at, he's listed at 6 foot on 247. He's already listed at 220, and he just got there. He was listed at 220 at high school. So, think about the size difference. So we'll see. Tim makes a good point in the chat. He says only weight was updated, so height will be updated next month, apparently.
Okay. Did they have any height goals for these guys? Like, you need to grow 3 inches. You need to lose 2 inches. Any of that?
Yeah, drink lots of coffee. My only thing about if I could create a perfect player based on the players that they have on the roster, a couple guys come to mind. First of all, Cannon Leonard can't get any bigger. He got here at 6'8". Okay. I think at some point you got to stop growing. That would be one. I think Caleb Johnson, you don't want him to get any bigger either. I like the idea of a big back, but not everybody can be like Derrick Henry. And at some point, you got to be – it's hard to get low when you're 6'2", 6'3".
Yes.
And I thought we saw that with Hayden Large. And not that he was bad at fullback last year, but it's hard to get low. We talked about that. I asked Kirk Ferentz that question at Media Day last year. And, he kind of was like, that's a challenge getting low at that size. He's a 6'5" fullback. So now he's probably not going to be playing much fullback this year. I think it's going to be Eli Miller, and they're probably going to use a lot less fullback. So those would be a couple of my things. Jack Dotzler, Cale Crow, they're both in the 6'6", 6'7" range. I think that's probably what you want out of your tackle, no bigger. Kamari Moulton came in, I think, at 5'8", 5'9". So, maybe you get, if he gets another inch or two, he can put a few more pounds in that frame, but he already did. So maybe that's an indicator that he did get bigger. Tim says, Drew was 5'11", and he's 6'2" now. Wow. Okay. I don't think he was listed at 5'11" as a freshman, though. Forgive me, Tim. I'm questioning that. Was Drew? Let me look at his.
I was joking about the height thing, but I guess there still is growth there for some guys. I just don't think of many guys entering college and then continuing to grow from a height standpoint.
Apparently, Drew Stevens did. Now I just looked. 247 had him at 6 foot even. Tim says he's 6'2" now, so he's a bigger kicker, right? I mean, I don't know the last time Iowa said Marshall Kane was probably close to that, and hit a big leg, obviously. Hit that 57-yarder against Pittsburgh to win. But, I don't know.